16. Rodin brought Sporif's list to his mind. About 20 names, the majority of them now dead. And all to pay for the death of one girl. Rodin could understand how the old man wanted those responsible to pay. But he could also see the waste. Was one person worth 20 others? To the old man, the answer was obvious. Yes, of course she was. 20, 50, 100. There was nothing more important to him than his daughter. He had done everything he could to save her from her illness. He would do everything he could to save her memory. But what of those he was having removed? Some, like the fat man, would have nobody to mourn their passing. His co-workers might notice his absence, but that would be it. Some of the names on the list were known to Rodin, and he knew of other things they did. It could be argued that they deserved to die. But others, like the couple, had friends and family. Others would be mourned. Would those close to them call for vengeance? Would they bring contracts out on those who had killed their friends and family? Would the mercenaries now become targets? Would they track everything back to the old man? There was a certain irony in this. Through bringing forth his own vengeance, the old man might be making himself a target. Where did it all end? If one death was answerable by 20 others, how soon before there was nobody left? Of course, that would never happen. Most people accepted that death happened. Most people knew that killing did not bring the dead back. The old man was deluded. Maybe all this bloodshed would make him feel better, but it would never reverse what had happened. He would only have his memories, regardless of how many others he had removed. Yet Rodin could understand why he wanted to do something. He had been ultimately unable to save his daughter. And like so many others, his inability to act in one area pushed him to act in another. He was not seeking vengeance for her sake but for his own. He was trying to prove to himself that he was still effectual. He was trying to make his own life easier. Seen like that, the old man was being selfish. Just like everyone else. Malice was helping his father, because it kept him close to the old man and his money. Sporif was helping Malice, because there was something he could gain from it. Ephraim had taken clients because it paid the bills, and possibly because it made her feel good when they went away happy. And Rodin was killing people so that his nightmares could be kept under control. Everyone was selfish. It was how things worked. Everyone was driven ultimately by the desire to please themselves. Those who said they put others first did so to feel better about themselves. Rodin thought of the work the paid companions did. It was so much more than sex. People hired them because they wanted company, or they wanted a shoulder to cry on, literally or metaphorically. Yes, some wanted sex pure and simple. But many wanted more than this. And the paid companions offered what was wanted. Not because they were good or caring, but because it was the sensible move. It was what paid for their food and rooms. And the controllers, they were after the same thing. A way to survive. Rodin thought of how Ephraim stopped working a few clients, then nothing. Maybe the final few clients were those she felt she had to see, despite any pain. And then she died. Had she seen those last few clients through Ratcher's insistence, or was it her own work ethic? The old man had painted a picture of the controller as a domineering monster, but that didn't sit squarely with Rodin's own impressions. And Rodin thought of the other girl, the one who had worked beside Ephraim so much. Helia. Most likely she was a friend as well as a co-worker. And she had stopped working soon after Ephraim did. No. That was an assumption. She stopped working for Ratch, but that didn't mean she was no longer a paid companion. Rodin ran a scenario through his head. Helia and Ephraim working together, close friends. They would talk through their problems, but when Ephraim died, a part of Helia would no longer be there. If she were to carry on working for Ratch, carrying on as if nothing had happened, there would be too much baggage. She would need a break. She would need something else. She might still be in this district, working for another controller. If Rodin could find her, she might be able to give him information on Ratch. He nodded to himself. That was his next task. Find Helia. Ephraim and Helia had met clients through Ratch, but paid companions were often required to hustle for business. They frequented certain areas of this district, seeking potential customers. Rodin knew the areas well. They attracted the type of person who might spend money on some company, but who might also hire a mercenary. He sat in dim cafes drinking second-rate coffee, while listening to the murmur of voices around. He wore an old crumpled jacket, with grey trousers that were in need of a wash. He left the stubble on his chin and refused to straighten his hair. He avoided the eyes of others. He was just another person down on their luck, wasting their time sitting in cafes watching the world go by. Another man who needed looking after. Someone who might be interested in a girl, if the opportunity arose. Another male driven by desires but held back by nerves. One of many such people. Rodin moved about, shuffling, eyes downcast. Different cafes, bars, a park. He wandered normal residential streets he knew to be used by the girls and their controllers. He made a point of not looking up at the windows, blinds down in the daytime, youths hanging around building entrances talking boisterously, playing cards. He made it clear that he was unaware of what they were protecting. He walked past the men who also looked down, and the occasional woman, all moving furtively, all trying not to draw attention to themselves. He didn't look round when they walked up the steps to a building, speaking in stuttered phrases to the youths standing in their way, gaining admittance with a pass note. He didn't pay attention when they took a last glance along the street, worried expressions showing relief as they stepped through the door. He didn't make any contact with the few who walked with confidence, dressed similarly to the youths but with more style, an indication of improved finances. He didn't make any sign of noticing how they greeted the youths, and how the younger ones treated them with respect as they passed through the doors into their domains. Rodin spent the day in such a manner, and learnt many names. He stored them all in his mind, built connections and searched for clues. And eventually, inevitably, he found a link. A woman in a bar, an overheard conversation, an arrangement with a possible client. And the name Helia was mentioned. He followed, discovering more, eventually finding Helia herself. He checked out her clients. They seemed better than the fat man, but not in the same league as the couple. She had left Ratch, but otherwise business was the same. She lived in a half-decent building in a 2-room setup, rent paid through a company listed by a number only. That was not unexpected. As long as the money flowed, the landlord would not ask questions. Rodin hacked into the building's security and monitored the eye outside Helia's rooms for a couple of days. She was visited by men and one woman, and they often stayed for a couple of hours, longer than it took for a simple naked tussle. They took their time, enjoying the company. Rodin trailed Helia, building up a picture of a tall, thin, well-dressed woman. She was confident, and had an ease with people that must have been a benefit in her work. Listening in to conversations, Rodin understood that she was knowledgeable on a range of subjects, and was a good listener, urging the talker on to say more. Again, a useful skill. Rodin played his waiting game. It would have been easy to approach someone and arrange a rendezvous, but that would give too much warning and alert others to his presence. No, best to seek another opportunity. The woman who lived in the rooms opposite Helia was away. Rodin was easily able to pull up her details and find her access code. He used this to enter the building, nonchalantly making his way to her rooms. Once there, he settled down for the night. From his observations, Rodin knew Helia would spend the afternoons out, returning to her rooms before dusk. Over the night she would be working, free to sleep in the early hours, rising later in the morning. That was the time Rodin needed to catch her. He set up a remote loop on the eye over her neighbor's door, feeding the image to his screen. Then he started working through the system, finding what he could about Helia's rooms. Rodin was able to isolate the door alarms. By studying the door of the rooms he was using, he felt confident he could access Helia's abode. After a sleep on a comfortable couch, interrupted by only the briefest of nightmares, he crossed the hallway. His confidence was not misplaced. She kept her rooms immaculate. The cushions were placed delicately on the sofa, and tables and shelves were free of clutter. The wooden floor was spotless, the rug clean. Everything in the food prep was tidy, nothing out of place, nothing spoiling the surfaces. Too clean and tidy. All for show. It didn't feel like a place where someone lived. It was still early, so Rodin made himself a drink with as little noise as he could. As he expected, the water heater was high quality, and the coffee itself a decent roast. He then sat and waited. About half an hour later, he heard noises from the bedroom. There was a soft grunting, fabric moving, then footsteps. He heard a door close, followed by running water. More noises as Helia readied herself for the day. But she would not be ready for what greeted her when she left her bedroom. At first she didn't see Rodin. She walked towards the kitchen and only turned when he coughed lightly. Her first move was to a drawer, grabbing a long blade. She held it before her, standing straight, and took a step forward.
Who the hell are you?
Relax. I'm not going to hurt you. If I wanted to, I would have had plenty of opportunity while you were asleep. I just want to talk for a while.
Make an appointment like everyone else. Get out of my home.
Rodin looked around, aware of her following his gaze. Your home. Who pays for it?
None of your business.
Her voice was steady, and Rodin guessed she had some experience of clients turning nasty. She held the blade with confidence, and he thought it likely she knew how to use it. He opened his arms, palms out, then deliberately placed them on the arms of the chair. I have no weapons in my hands. I repeat, I don't want to hurt you. I want to talk. And I don't mean some comforting mumbo-jumbo like your clients get. She looked him over, head to foot.
You have weapons.
He nodded. There was no point denying it. But they are going to remain concealed. Sit down. Keep hold of the blade by all means. He waved to the chair opposite, across the small table. Slowly she moved, always facing Rodin. She sat still, grasping the blade in one hand. As she lowered herself, she placed her other hand on her stomach. Rodin noticed the slight bulge. It was something he might be able to use.
What do you want? Make it quick.
I'm looking for someone. I don't think you have anything to do with him now, but any information would be useful. He goes by the name of Ratch. She let out a sigh, her shoulders sagging. Resignation.
No idea who you're talking about.
Rodin was silent for a moment. The lie was obvious. Her lip curled as she shook her head.
I haven't seen him in a while. There's nothing more I can tell you.
So why did you leave? Her mouth opened and closed for a moment. Eventually she said,
Who said I left him? And anyway, what is it to you?
Rodin shrugged. I wondered if the child was his. He watched her free hand move to cover her belly, rubbing gently. For a brief moment she looked down.
He has nothing to do with it.
She tightened her grip on the blade.
And nor do you, so keep your thoughts to yourself.
Rodin saw a possibility, reading more in her actions. He recalled the woman in the bar, arranging a meeting. He remembered the name Helia, coming up in negotiations. He took the gamble. He wouldn't be pleased with the lost income, would he? Is it better, working for a woman? Does she understand things better? She shook her head.
You know nothing about it.
So enlighten me. She breathed deeply and Rodin could sense her thinking. Her eyes flickered, and slowly a smile crept over her features. It illuminated her face, bringing color to her pale skin. She continued to rub her stomach gently, the material of her top shifting, exposing a line of flesh.
I'm bringing a new life into this world. I'm carrying something that will one day be another person. Do you know how that feels? No, of course you don't. There's no way you can. It's one of the things that sets us apart. We have this gift, we can create life. Oh, I know you play your part, but we are the ones who nurture it, who bring it to term. We are the ones who have that bond. And it feels incredible.
She looked down, seeming to notice for the first time how much of her flesh was uncovered. She pulled her top higher, freeing the slight bump, moving the arm with the blade to one side. She gave Rodin a full view. He could see the bump, and could see the contrast against her toned body. Before the child, that stomach would have been washboard flat. Now it was a delicate mound, being caressed by her long fingers. He noticed the polish on her nails.
Would you like to touch it? I know it's something many men want to do. There's not much to feel at the moment. It's not as if you'll feel anything moving. But if you wanted to, you can. It's not something I'd let anyone do. But I think I can trust you. Feel it if you want.
Rodin raised his eyes. She still beamed her head to one side. But her eyes held something back. She was good. It was almost possible to forget the blade she still held. I can see why Ratch might not like you being unable to work for him. As her eyebrows rose, he continued. I can understand how you could demand rooms like these. You have a clear talent for your job, Helia. But I'm good at my job too. Pull your top back down and tell me what you can. The smile disappeared, her hand pulling the material over the bump. And the blade pointed his way once more.
This is about Effie, isn't it?
Effie. He feigned ignorance. This girl was smart and Rodin needed her on side.
It's obvious. I hear what's happening, and I can put things together. Some of her regular clients wind up dead, and her distraught father is well connected. She told me he had money stashed away all over the place. He's removing everyone who had anything to do with her.
She sagged into the chair.
It's such a waste. Yes, it's sad about Effie. Hell, I still feel like I've lost a sister, but it was something inside. Nobody knew, and once they found out, it was too late. He's got some kind of vendetta, but it's not going to bring her back. All it's doing is making more people unhappy.
Rodin's brain was working fast, putting pieces of the puzzle in order. He prepared for where he could steer the conversation. Is that why Ratch disappeared? She laughed, though it was closer to a snort.
Ratch would never want any of his girls harmed. Leaving aside the fact that he cared for all of us, it didn't make any business sense. How could we comfort a client if we were in pain? He wanted all of us to be as healthy and happy as we could.
Is that why he ran away and left you? It was a cheap shot, and Rodin regretted the words even as they came from his lips. He saw the hand holding the blade, saw the knuckles whitening. When Helia spoke, it was through clenched teeth.
He was more of a father to me than the bastard who brought me up, I can tell you that much. He doesn't deserve to be hounded in this way.
Again, Rodin wondered who was responsible for the new life inside Helia. Or maybe she did see her old employer as a father figure. Whatever the case, she was loyal to him. Why are you telling me all this?
I've met people like you before. You go after someone, and that is all you care about. You want information, and you force others to give it up to you. She sighed, lowering the blade. But at least you are being civil about it. I'm sure there are others who would threaten to beat the information out of me. Especially if they knew of my condition.
She placed her free hand on her belly again, and showed the trace of a smile.
At least you haven't hurt me. I believe you were telling the truth earlier, when you said your weapons would remain concealed.
She looked down, as if seeing the blade for the first time, turning it over in her hand before throwing it to the floor.
I might have got one slice in if I was lucky, but I wouldn't have stood a chance, would I?
Her eyes met his and he shook his head. She would never have reached him before he buried a blade in her.
I've been here before, you know. In a similar situation. One of my clients was involved in something, and a man came. He practically burst my door down and held a blade up to my throat. He wanted me to tell him all I could about this man. He threatened to carve up my face if I didn't talk. The way he said it, he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew the scars would turn people away. He wasn't threatening to kill me, but to leave me without work. He was threatening to take away my livelihood.
Her hand reached up to her neck, physical memories rising. Rodin urged her on. And you talked. A resigned shrug.
What else could I do? He'd find his man one way or another, and why should I suffer for it?
The client. Another shrug.
He wasn't a bad man. Not really. He treated me well. I knew he had some dodgy dealings, but who doesn't? And he never talked about his work. He didn't talk much anyway. Didn't want me to talk either. I think he enjoyed the quiet more than anything else. But he's not important. Not a bad client, but not one of my best. Not like some of the ones who have been killed recently.
She brought a hand up to her face. Rodin wondered what was going through her mind, which of the clients she was thinking about. He knew she had worked with the couple, along with Effie. He could imagine that being a pleasant time for her. Alea was smart, and Rodin suspected that Helia would have enjoyed some intelligent conversation. Fallon may well have been good company too. Rodin really hadn't seen him at his best. Helia brought her hand down. Her eyes were red, no tears yet, but they were building.
Ratch was more distraught than I was. It was one of the few times I saw him get angry. He talked about tracking this thug down, but I knew he'd never do that. He wouldn't antagonize people. And he couldn't stand violence. That's why he was so upset, I think. One of his girls had been threatened in such a violent way. He kept on finding imagined mistakes, things that could have been different. He'd arranged my first meeting with this client, and he saw blame even in that. He said, if only he'd turned the man away, said something about all his girls being fully booked. Or if only he'd arranged the meetings differently. Maybe this thug tracking the client down wouldn't have found me. I knew Ratch wouldn't do anything though. It wasn't in his nature to go after others. I was okay, and that was the important thing. See, he cared. All this crap about controllers only being interested in the money, it might apply to some, but not to Ratch. He wanted us all to be happy. Yes, we were making good money, and Ratch was doing well for himself, but I genuinely don't think that was important to him.
She lapsed into silence for a while, and Rodin did nothing to break it. Most paid companions probably felt something similar towards their controllers, that those above them truly cared for their well-being. Rodin could see how a good controller would work to encourage such an attitude, even if this were not totally true. But Helia's words sounded genuine. Rodin was coming to the conclusion that Ratch was one of the few genuine good guys around.
I worked for him for years. He helped me so many times. And we had a bond, you know? We'd spend time alone, just talking. At one point, I started imagining a future for us, settling down as a couple, having kids. But that would never happen. He'd never settled for one person. And not because he'd become bored, or any of the usual reasons people stray. No, Ratch cared too much for everyone. I remember when Effie started working. She was so naive then, but Ratch looked after her. He had me help him train her, and she learnt so fast. She was good. He started her off on some of his best clients, the ones who showed respect for all of us. He paid for protection, and had someone waiting, watching outside just in case. And when she was ready, he set her up with a few of the rougher clients, even though it pained him to do so. But he knew she needed to grow. She needed to understand what she was getting into. He needed to know she could handle herself. I remember, the first time this happened. He'd arranged the room, and he hid in a closet, ready to leap out if things got too bad. He'd never hurt a fly, but he was standing there, a club in his hand, ready to protect this new girl if things got out of hand. Can you imagine how he must have pushed himself to be there? And he really cared for Effie. I don't use the word lightly, but I believe he loved her. Real love, not what some of the clients talked about. He loved the real her, the Effie inside, not the idea of her or her body. Apart from those rougher clients, the ones he used to train her, he worked hard to make sure her clients were the sweetest, you know. He tried not to play favorites, but it was so obvious. Of course, none of us minded. She was such a small thing, so timid at first. She was ideal for the clients he picked. Whereas the rest of us could cope with some of the stranger requests others asked for, Effie wouldn't have been able to deliver the service. Not in the way we could. She shrugged. Each person has their niche, you know. And Effie's was with the gentler clients. They loved her. She was fully booked, and Ratch had to tell her to slow down. She'd agreed to other meetings, and he was worried she'd wear herself out. And when she came back from her treatment, Ratch begged her to take more time off. He had been paying her as she recovered, and he even talked of increasing this pay. He didn't want her to start back too soon. But she insisted. She wasn't all innocent, you know. She started growing into her role, and she could use her image. She used it on Ratch. That little girl lost look, a twist of her head, and he melted. He relented. She started working not because he forced her to, but because she wanted to.
She looked up then. Her mouth formed a smile, but it was bittersweet. A tear rolled down one cheek.
I only saw Ratch cry once in all the years I knew him. That was when he heard Effie was dead. And he didn't shed a few tears. No, he was distraught. I tried comforting him, but he practically pushed me away. I watched him sit for half an hour, great sobs coming from him, crying himself dry. He blamed himself. If only he'd been stronger, if only he'd spotted the signs earlier. I think deep down, he knew that there was nothing he could have done. But it tore him up inside.
The words filtered through Rodin's mind. Helia was good at her job, and she would know how to spin a story. She would be adept at reading others and knowing the words to say, in order to achieve her aims. But these words felt true. Rodin felt he could trust her image of Ratch far more than the twisted picture the old man had painted. You know why I'm here? Why are you telling me this? Rodin kept his voice low. It was a genuine question. She shook her head, looking down to her hands, which were once more resting on the new life growing inside her.
I know you have your job to do. I know you're a professional. But you're not like that other thug. You haven't threatened me. You've been civil. And I think there's good in you. I want to imagine you are a good man. I want to believe you will do the right thing. I suppose I'm telling you this in the hope that I can help Ratch. After all that he's done for me, and all he did for Effie and the others. I don't know how I can protect him, but if I tell the truth, is there anything you can do?
She looked up then, and Rodin forced himself to hold her gaze. He could give nothing away. He didn't want to give any false hope. He had a job to do. He had not failed in a contract yet, and he didn't intend to start now. But that didn't mean he had to like it. If I stop, Effie's father will hire someone else. You know that. Another tear.
Then do what you can. Please. He doesn't deserve to suffer.
She realized how hopeless things were for her old friend. But Rodin understood. If Ratch were to die, she wanted it to be quick and painless. He was already suffering, and Helia wanted his suffering to end as fast as possible. She spoke quietly.
I don't know where he went. No details. But he talked about heading north. That is all I know.
He nodded and rose, headed for the door.
Please do something for me.
He turned. She sat still, unmoved.
Please, think about what I've said and do what you think is best.
And then she shut her eyes, shaking her head.
I'm sorry, Ratch,
she said, even more quietly. Rodin reached for the handle, opened the door, then turned back to Helia. When that child comes, you make sure you care for it like Ratch cared for you. He didn't wait for a response. He left, wondering where his words had come from.